"Let your lineage sprout in me," said Apache women. The rancher let her stay. The sun rose slowly over the endless stretches of the desert, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds. The dry wind whispered through the tall grass and scattered sagebrush, carrying the faint scent of earth and the promise of a long, hot day ahead. On the edge of this harsh open land stood a solitary ranch, its wooden fences worn by time and weather. Thomas McAllister, the rancher, stepped out onto the porch of his small but sturdy house. He squinted against the sunlight, scanning the horizon as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Life on the ranch was hard, lonely, and unpredictable. Yet Thomas had grown used to it. For years he had lived here with nothing but his animals, the wind, and the wide, empty sky above him. Thomas had inherited the ranch from his father, a man who had taught him the ways of the land. He knew how to read the weather by the clouds, how to guide cattle across rocky hills, and how to coax crops from the stubborn soil. Still, for all his skills, there was one thing Thomas could not control: the loneliness that settled over him like a shadow. Every evening when the sun dipped below the horizon, he had no family nearby, no neighbors who cared to stop by, and no friends who understood the rhythm of ranch life. The animals were his companions, but they could not speak or share his thoughts. Each day felt like a repetition of the one before, quiet and predictable, until the morning of her arrival. It was just after sunrise when Thomas first noticed her. At first, she was little more than a dark silhouette moving slowly along the far edge of the property. She seemed to appear from nowhere, stepping carefully across the dusty land. Her movements were deliberate and graceful, as if she belonged to the earth itself. Thomas watched from a distance, curious but cautious. Few people ever came this far out, and he was wary of strangers. The woman's clothes were simple, made of soft cloth and muted earth tones, and her long dark hair was braided neatly down her back. She carried nothing but a small bundle tied in a piece of cloth, yet there was an air of quiet confidence about her that drew his attention. He stepped down from the porch and called out to her, his voice steady but careful. "Hello there. Who are you? What brings you to my ranch?" The woman stopped and turned toward him. Her eyes, dark and steady, met his, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then, in a calm voice, she said words that Thomas would never forget. "Let your lineage sprout in me." Thomas blinked, startled. The words were strange, poetic, and almost impossible to understand at first. He looked at her closely, trying to gauge whether she was joking or if she was serious. There was no sign of mockery in her expression. Instead, she stood there with an honesty that was almost too deep to read, as if she were offering something far more important than herself. I don't understand," Thomas said finally. "What do you mean by that?" The woman smiled faintly, a small curl at the corner of her lips that did not diminish the seriousness in her eyes. "I mean that I wish to stay here. I wish to live, to learn, and to help. I am not asking for much. I only ask for a place where I can belong, even if just a little." Thomas felt a mixture of surprise, curiosity, and unease. He had spent his entire life relying on himself, sharing his land, his home, and his life with someone else, especially someone he did not know, was not something he was used to. Yet something about her words, and the calm way she spoke them, stirred something in him. It was as if the desert had suddenly offered him a companion he never expected. "I don't know. It's not common for people to just appear here," Thomas said slowly. "And it's dangerous out here, you know. The land can be harsh, the nights cold, the animals unpredictable." "I understand," she replied. "I have lived in harsh places before. I know how to care for myself. But I also know that even strong people need a little help sometimes. I only ask for a chance to prove I can be of use." "Let me show you." Thomas hesitated. His instincts told him to turn her away, to keep his distance, to maintain the life he had carefully built. But there was a quiet strength in her voice that made him pause. He had spent years speaking only to himself, and suddenly, here was someone who carried her own courage, someone who did not plead or beg, but simply asked for a chance. "Very well," he said finally, his voice firm but not unkind. "You can stay for now, but know this: the land is not easy, and life here is harder than you might imagine. You will need to work, to respect the rules, and to earn your place every day." She nodded, her eyes bright with gratitude. "I will do everything I can. Thank you for trusting me." From that moment, a delicate understanding began between them. Thomas watched as she carefully unpacked her small bundle and began to make herself at home, moving with a quiet efficiency that impressed him. She knew how to handle animals, tending to the horses and cattle with gentle hands. She observed the land with keen eyes, noticing things Thomas sometimes overlooked, like the signs of water under the dry soil, or the patterns in the clouds that hinted at coming weather. Over the next few hours, as the sun climbed higher, Thomas and the woman, whose name he would soon learn was Noya, shared a silent routine. He showed her where the water troughs were, where the best grazing spots could be found, and how to care for the animals during the heat of the day. Noya listened attentively, asking questions only when she needed clarification, but often observing in silence, learning from his every movement. As the day wore on, Thomas began to feel something he had not felt in years, a sense of hope. The desert was still wide and empty, the work still hard, but now it was shared. The presence of another person, someone who did not demand but offered herself willingly, seemed to breathe life into the ranch in a way Thomas had forgotten was possible. He felt the stirrings of connection, of trust, and even of friendship. By evening, as the sun dipped low again and the sky turned deep shades of orange and purple, Thomas found himself walking alongside Noya, guiding a small herd of cattle back to the pens. They spoke little, but each word was carefully chosen, filled with respect. Thomas noticed the way Noya observed the land, her face serene yet alert, and realized that she was more than a guest. She was someone who could understand the rhythm of the ranch, someone who might one day belong here as much as he did. That night, as Thomas sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge one by one, he thought about her words, "Let your lineage sprout in me." At first they had seemed strange, almost mysterious, but now he understood a little better. She was not speaking just of heritage or family in the usual sense. She was speaking of connection, of continuity, of life that could grow even in the harshest conditions if nurtured with care and trust. For Thomas, it was the beginning of a story he had never expected. A story that would change not only the ranch, but the way he saw the world, the land, and the people who could walk upon it. And for Noya, it was the first step toward a life that promised safety, learning, and a place where she could plant her roots and flourish, even in the unforgiving desert. The days passed slowly on the ranch, each blending into the next, but with Noya's arrival, the rhythm of life began to change. Thomas McAllister watched her closely as she moved around the land with quiet confidence, learning the ways of the ranch while sharing small pieces of her own knowledge. Noya had grown up with her people on the edge of the desert, learning the ways of survival, the patterns of the wind, and the signs that told where water might be hidden. She had learned to read the land as others read a book. Now, she brought those skills to the ranch, and Thomas noticed the difference almost immediately. At first, some of the ranch hands were uneasy. The workers had lived in the region all their lives, and few had ever interacted with Apache people beyond stories and rumors. They whispered to each other as Noya passed, questioning why Thomas would allow her to stay. Some thought it was risky, others thought it was foolish. But none dared speak openly against Thomas. Not yet. Noya ignored the murmurs, focusing on the work in front of her. She fed the animals, tended the fields, and learned to mend fences with careful hands. Her movements were deliberate, precise, and respectful of the land. Slowly, her competence began to earn quiet admiration, though tension still lingered in the air. One afternoon, as the sun beat down on the dusty ground, Thomas noticed Noya sitting beneath a mesquite tree, her eyes closed as if listening to the wind. He walked toward her, curious. "What are you doing?" he asked. Noya opened her eyes and smiled. "Listening," she said simply. "The wind tells stories if you know how to hear them. It can warn you about storms, show where animals are moving, and even tell you when the earth is thirsty." Thomas frowned slightly, not used to such ideas. "The wind? That's just air moving around." "How can it tell stories?" She laughed softly, a sound like a gentle stream. "It is more than air. It carries life, Thomas. It carries memory. If you pay attention, it will teach you things no book ever could." Thomas shook his head, partly amused and partly puzzled. Still, he found himself listening more carefully to the desert winds after that, noticing small details he had once overlooked. The way the dust swirled across the ground, the sudden change in the smell of the earth, the quiet rustle of the grass as a rabbit darted through. He realized that perhaps Noya was teaching him something deeper than the land itself, something about awareness, patience, and respect. Despite Noya's growing importance on the ranch, the tension among the workers did not fully disappear. One morning, a small argument erupted over a missing tool. The ranch hands, quick to blame her, muttered under their breaths about Apache people being careless or untrustworthy. Noya had done nothing wrong, but she had learned early in life that confrontation could escalate quickly. Instead of reacting with anger, she spoke calmly, explaining how the tool had been misplaced and offering to help search for it. Thomas stepped in to support her, and while the situation was resolved, it left a lingering unease. "I don't understand why they judge you before they know you," Thomas said quietly that evening as they walked along the fence line. Noya shrugged, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "People fear what they do not understand. Sometimes they need to see patience, kindness, and skill before their minds change. We cannot make them see, only show them the truth." Thomas admired her composure. Even in the face of prejudice and suspicion, Noya remained steady, unshaken. It reminded him of the strength his father had once shown, but in a different way. Whereas his father had faced storms and accidents with hard work and stubbornness, Noya faced storms of human nature with quiet resilience. Life continued like this for weeks. Noya's days were filled with work, feeding the animals before sunrise, checking fences along the sprawling land, gathering firewood, and preparing meals. Yet she also made time to teach Thomas small things he had never known. She showed him how to find edible plants hidden among the rocks, how to make traps for small animals without harming them, and how to use natural remedies to treat minor cuts and bruises. Thomas began to realize that the knowledge she carried was not just useful, it was invaluable. One morning, news came from the nearby settlement that a severe drought was spreading across the region. Streams and ponds were drying up, crops were failing, and animals were struggling to find food and water. Thomas knew the ranch would face hard times, but he also knew that with Noya's knowledge, they had a better chance of surviving. Together, they devised a plan to conserve water, move the animals to better grazing areas, and prepare for the long months ahead. Yet not everyone was convinced. The workers grew anxious, and old prejudices surfaced in hushed conversations. Some blamed Noya for the difficulties, even though she had suggested solutions that could save the herd. The tension built slowly until one evening when a young ranch hand accused her openly of bringing misfortune to the land. Thomas stepped in, his voice firm. "That is enough. She has saved this ranch more than you know. If anyone has a right to complain, it is me, but I will not allow insults to someone who has done nothing but help." The workers fell silent, though some continued to grumble privately. Noya did not speak of the accusation. Instead, she focused on her work, tending the animals and caring for the fields, as if nothing had happened. Thomas admired this again, her ability to remain calm, to stay focused on what truly mattered rather than being distracted by anger or fear. As the days grew hotter and the drought worsened, a small bond formed between Thomas and Noya. They worked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes exchanging brief words. Thomas began to share small stories of his father, of his childhood on the ranch, and of the lessons he had learned from the land. Noya listened quietly, occasionally adding her own experiences in a soft voice, stories of survival, of the Apache people, and of the lessons her mother had taught her. In these quiet moments, Thomas felt a sense of connection he had never known before. It was not friendship in the usual sense, nor was it family, but something in between, a deep understanding that comes when two people share the same struggle and the same respect for life. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky in colors of fire, Thomas and Noya stood at the edge of the ranch, looking out over the dry, cracked earth. "Do you think we can make it through?" Thomas asked, worry in his voice. Noya nodded slowly. "The land is strong. The animals are strong. And you are strong. We will survive. But only if we work together, listen to the land, and trust each other." Thomas felt a warmth in his chest, a mixture of relief and admiration. He realized that he had underestimated her, and perhaps underestimated himself as well. In the harshness of the desert, he had found not just a helper, but a guide, someone who could see beyond the dryness and heat to the life that still existed beneath the surface. Over the next few weeks, Noya's influence on the ranch grew quietly but steadily. She helped Thomas organize the work, prepared food that kept the animals healthy, and even trained some of the younger ranch hands in methods that made their work easier and more efficient. Slowly, the whispers and suspicion of the workers faded, replaced with respect, though some still struggled with their own prejudices. For Thomas, the drought was not just a challenge of survival, it became a lesson in trust and partnership. Noya's presence reminded him that the ranch was more than land and animals, it was community. Even if that community was small and unconventional, he began to see the potential for growth and renewal, not just in the fields and herds, but in the people around him and in himself. By the end of the part of the season, the ranch had survived better than Thomas had dared to hope. The water was low, the grass was sparse, but, thanks to Noya's knowledge and patience, the animals remained healthy, and the land showed signs of recovery. Thomas felt a quiet gratitude toward her, a feeling he had rarely experienced. He knew that allowing Noya to stay was more than a moment of trust. It was a turning point in his life, a step toward something larger than himself. That night, as the stars appeared one by one over the desert, Thomas thought again about her words from the day she arrived. "Let your lineage sprout in me." Now he understood a little more. It was not about bloodlines or family alone. It was about passing knowledge, hope, and care into the hands of someone willing to nurture it. And in doing so, life, his life, the ranch, and even the barren land could flourish in ways he had never imagined. The drought stretched on day after day with the sun burning fiercely overhead. The earth cracked under the heat, and the grass grew thinner, turning brown and brittle. The streams and ponds that had once nourished the animals were now nearly dry. Every morning, Thomas McAllister walked the ranch with a heavy heart, checking on the cattle and horses, worried about what the next day might bring. Even with Noya's knowledge and careful planning, the land was beginning to show the strain of months without rain. Noya worked tirelessly, rising before dawn and moving from task to task without complaint. She checked fences, guided the animals to the best grazing areas, and found hidden pockets of water that others had overlooked. She moved with quiet confidence, but Thomas noticed the worry lines that began to appear on her face. The drought was hard on everyone, and even her calmness could not hide her concern. One afternoon, as Thomas was mending a broken fence post, a loud commotion rose from the pasture. The herd had panicked, their lowing and movement sending dust into the air. Thomas ran toward the sound, his heart pounding. When he arrived, he saw that some of the cattle had broken through a weakened section of the fence, scattering across the dry land. He could see Noya in the distance, running toward the herd, her arms outstretched, calling to the animals in soft, steady tones. "Stay back," Thomas shouted, but she ignored him. He watched, half in awe and half in fear, as she moved among the panicked cattle, guiding them with her voice and gestures. Slowly, she brought them back toward the fence. One by one, her presence calm and firm, as if she were part of the land itself. Thomas could barely believe it. What could have turned into a disaster was avoided because of her courage and skill. When the herd was finally safe, Thomas walked up to her, breathless from both relief and amazement. "That was incredible," he said. "You could have been hurt out there." Noya wiped the sweat from her forehead and smiled faintly. "The animals sensed my calm. I could not let fear control me, Thomas. The land gives us signs if we pay attention. I knew I could guide them back." Even as Thomas praised her, the other ranch hands were not as kind. A few muttered under their breath, clearly unsettled by the incident. Some blamed her for the panic in the first place, suggesting that if she had not been on the land, the cattle would have stayed calm. Their words were sharp, filled with suspicion and resentment. Noya did not answer, and Thomas did not defend her immediately, though his eyes followed the men with quiet anger. Later that evening, Thomas found Noya sitting by the fire, mending a small bag she had brought with her. He sat down beside her. "Do you hear what they say about you?" he asked gently. Noya nodded. "Yes, but their fear comes from not understanding. I cannot make them see what I see." "I can only show them," Thomas sighed, shaking his head. "It's not fair. You've done more for this ranch than anyone else, and yet they doubt you." She looked at him, her dark eyes steady. "Fairness is not always part of life, Thomas. Courage, patience, and skill are. And if we focus on what we can control, we will survive." The next few weeks were even harder. The drought worsened, and the once healthy cattle began to lose weight. Streams dried completely, and the desert seemed emptier and harsher than ever before. Tension among the workers grew. They complained about the heat, the lack of food, and the long hours. Some openly criticized Noya, accusing her of bringing bad luck to the ranch. Even small mistakes, like a misplaced tool or a missed fence repair, were blamed on her, though she had little to do with them. One morning, a young ranch hand came running to Thomas, panic in his eyes. "The northern herd is missing," he shouted. "I don't know how it happened. They were here last night and now they're gone." Thomas felt a cold knot in his stomach. The northern herd was a significant portion of the ranch's cattle. Losing them could be disastrous. He ran toward the pasture with the young man, only to find Noya already there, assessing the situation with calm determination. "They have wandered toward the dry creek bed," she said. "Follow me, and we can guide them back safely." The path was rough, full of rocks and dried brush, and the heat was nearly unbearable. But he knew Noya was right. They moved quickly, Thomas and the young ranch hand following her lead. Noya guided the cattle with quiet authority, using gestures and soft calls. Slowly, carefully, the herd returned to the safety of the fenced pasture. When they were finally back, Thomas turned to the ranch hands who had gathered. "Did you see that?" he asked. "If it were not for Noya, half the herd would have been lost. She has saved us more times than you know." Some of the men looked ashamed, others reluctantly nodded, but a few remained skeptical, their faces tight with disbelief. Noya said nothing, simply tending to the cattle and ensuring every animal was safe. That night Thomas sat with her by the fire, feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. "I don't understand why some of them cannot see what you do," he said quietly. Noya looked at the flames, her expression calm. "They see only what they expect. They do not notice the quiet strength. But strength does not need approval to exist. We have done what is necessary. That is enough." Just as Thomas was beginning to relax, a new challenge appeared. A sudden windstorm swept across the desert, whipping dust and debris into the air. The animals became restless, the fences creaked under pressure, and the temperature dropped suddenly as clouds rolled in. Thomas and Noya worked together through the chaos, securing animals, tying loose equipment, and guiding the smaller livestock into shelter. By the time the storm passed, the ranch was battered but intact. The storm, however, left a new worry. Some of the fences had been damaged, and the northern pasture was now open to predators. The ranch hands blamed Noya for not anticipating the wind, but Thomas knew that no one could have predicted the storm. He stood up for her once again, reinforcing the bond of trust between them. In the days that followed, Noya continued her work, undeterred by criticism or fear. She taught the ranch hands how to repair the fences quickly, how to secure water containers, and how to guide the cattle safely. Slowly, some of the workers began to see her value, her knowledge, and her courage. Others remained stubborn, clinging to prejudice, but even they could not deny the results she produced. Through it all, Thomas noticed something remarkable. Noya did not seek praise or recognition. She worked quietly, with focus and patience, letting her actions speak louder than words. Thomas realized that this was the kind of strength he had rarely seen in his life, strength that did not rely on force or authority, but on understanding, skill, and heart. As the drought continued and the land grew even harsher, Thomas and Noya became a team in every sense. They relied on each other, learned from each other, and faced the challenges of the desert together. Even the skeptical ranch hands began to respect her, seeing that she was not just a visitor, but someone who had become essential to the ranch's survival. One evening, as the sun set and the desert sky turned gold and crimson, Thomas looked over the land and felt a sense of quiet pride. Despite the drought, the challenges, and the doubts, the ranch had survived. The animals were safe, the fences repaired, and the land showing signs of resilience. And it was Noya who had reminded him that survival was not just about hard work. It was about understanding, patience, and the courage to face life's storms with calm determination. That night, as the stars began to appear, Thomas thought once again of Noya's first words, "Let your lineage sprout in me." Now more than ever he understood the depth of what she had said. She had brought life, knowledge, and strength into the ranch. She had helped it survive when survival seemed impossible, and in doing so, She had begun to create a connection that would last far beyond the hardships of the drought. The days following the storm were tense, but the ranch began to show signs of recovery. The cattle had calmed, fences were repaired, and the small patches of grass that remained were being carefully rationed. Thomas McAllister walked the land each morning with a watchful eye, but there was a new feeling in his chest, a mixture of pride and hope. Noya had become more than just a helper. She had become his guide, his teacher, and in many ways the heart of the ranch. Yet, the challenges were far from over. One morning, as Thomas and Noya checked the northern pasture, they discovered that some of the younger cattle were weak and sickly from the prolonged drought. Their ribs showed through thin hides, and they struggled to stand. Thomas's heart sank. He had feared this day, but seeing it was harder than he imagined. Noya knelt beside the weakest of the animals, examining it carefully. She gathered herbs and leaves she had spotted near the dry creek bed, crushing them between her hands and mixing them with water. "This will help strengthen them," she explained. "It is not a cure for everything, but it will give them a chance." Thomas watched in awe as she carefully administered the mixture to the calves. He had seen many ranchers face sick animals, but he had never seen anyone approach it with such knowledge, patience, and care. "You really know your way around the land," he said softly. Noya smiled faintly. "The land teaches you if you are willing to listen. Every plant, every stone, every stream has a lesson. The animals know this, too. They respond to kindness and understanding." The rest of the ranch hands watched silently, some still skeptical, others quietly impressed. Slowly, they began to see that Noya's approach was different, but effective. She had not only kept the cattle alive through the drought, but was now helping them grow stronger despite the harsh conditions. Just as Thomas began to feel relief, news came from a nearby settlement that frightened him. A group of outsiders had been spotted near the ranch boundaries, people who were known for taking livestock and land if they thought they could. Fear rippled through the ranch hands. Some whispered about defending the land with force, while others worried that the drought had made the ranch too weak to protect itself. Thomas turned to Noya, seeking guidance. "What do we do?" he asked, tension in his voice. Noya stood tall, her eyes steady. "We prepare, but we do not fight recklessly. Strength is not only in force, it is in planning, knowledge, and unity. We will protect what we have, but we will do it wisely." Over the next few days, Thomas and Noya worked tirelessly. They reinforced fences, prepared hidden food and water for the animals, and created paths to guide the cattle safely if danger came. Noya taught the ranch hands how to read tracks in the sand, how to anticipate movement, and how to position themselves to protect the herd without unnecessary risk. Slowly, the men began to trust her, relying on her wisdom and skills rather than just their own strength. One evening, the outsiders finally arrived. They rode along the horizon, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. The ranch hands tensed, ready for confrontation, but Thomas held up a hand. "Wait," he said, glancing at Noya. She nodded. "We do not need to fight, unless we must. The land is on our side if we use it wisely." Following her instructions, Thomas and the ranch hands guided the cattle to a hidden part of the northern pasture, where natural barriers and dry creek beds would make it difficult for the outsiders to approach. They waited quietly, hidden behind fences and rocks, watching the strangers as they passed by, unaware of the cattle's location. By sunset, the outsiders had moved on, leaving the ranch untouched. The relief among the workers was palpable, but Thomas knew it was Noya's strategy that had saved them. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and respect. For the first time he realized that her knowledge, calmness, and courage were not just helpful, they were essential. In the following weeks, the drought slowly began to ease. A few small rains fell, soaking the dry earth and giving new life to the grasses. The cattle grew stronger, and the ranch began to feel alive again. Thomas noticed a change in the ranch hands as well. Where there had once been suspicion and prejudice, there was now respect and cooperation. Noya's quiet strength had shifted the balance. People were beginning to see what Thomas had known from the start. She was indispensable, not just because of her knowledge, but because of her heart and courage. One afternoon, Thomas and Noya stood on the porch, watching the animals graze in the renewed pastures. Thomas spoke softly, almost to himself. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Noya. You saved this ranch, and more than that, you saved all of us." Noya looked at him, her expression calm but full of warmth. "We saved each other, Thomas."
"You trusted me when others doubted. You allowed me to help."
That is what made the difference. Strength is not in one person. It is in what we do together. Thomas nodded, understanding her words more deeply than he could have imagined. He realized that the ranch was no longer just land, cattle, and fences. It was a living community, bound by trust, knowledge, and respect. Noya had brought life, courage, and wisdom into a place that had once felt empty and lonely. The months passed, and the seasons slowly shifted. The rains became more regular. The grass grew tall again, and the cattle thrived. Noya continued to teach and guide not just Thomas but everyone on the ranch. She showed the workers how to care for the land, how to anticipate challenges, and how to work together in ways that they had never learned before. One day, a neighbor from a nearby settlement came to visit, curious about the stories he had heard of Noya and the ranch. He had expected to find conflict and trouble, but instead, he saw a well-managed ranch, thriving livestock, and workers who respected and followed Noya's guidance.
He asked Thomas quietly, "Who is she?"
"She is more than a helper. She is the heart of this place. She has saved the land, the animals, and even us. We are lucky to have her." Noya, standing beside Thomas, smiled faintly at the compliment, but she did not let it distract her from her work. She moved among the animals, checking on the weakest ones, ensuring that every creature was healthy and safe. That evening, as the sun set over the desert, Thomas felt a deep sense of peace. The ranch had survived the worst of the drought, and it had emerged stronger because of trust, knowledge, and the courage to face challenges together. He thought once again of her first words, "Let your lineage sprout in me." Now he understood fully. She had nurtured the land, the animals, and the people around her, allowing life to grow even in the harshest conditions. Thomas realized that this was the true turning point, not just for the ranch, but for himself. He had learned to trust, to share responsibility, and to see the value in someone who had once been a stranger. Noya had not only proven her worth, she had transformed the ranch, the workers, and Thomas himself. She had shown that patience, courage, and wisdom could overcome fear, doubt, and adversity. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle above the desert, Thomas and Noya stood quietly, watching the land they had saved together. The ranch was no longer a place of solitude and struggle. It was a place of life, hope, and possibility. Thomas knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they could face them together. And for Noya, it was the fulfillment of her promise. She had sprouted the lineage she had spoken of, not just through survival, but through trust, courage, and the careful nurturing of life in all its forms. The ranch, the people, and the animals had all become part of her story, just as she had become part of theirs. The seasons changed slowly, as they always did on the wide, open land of the ranch. The harsh drought that had tested every living thing gradually faded, replaced by gentle rains that soaked the soil and filled the once dry streams. Grass sprouted green and thick, the cattle grew strong again, and the desert, which had seemed so empty and unforgiving, began to feel alive once more. Thomas McAllister watched the changes with a deep sense of relief, but he knew the real reason for the ranch's recovery. Noya. Over the months, she had become inseparable from the rhythm of the land. She rose with the sun, tending the animals and checking the pastures. She repaired fences, guided the workers, and shared her knowledge freely, never asking for recognition, never seeking reward. But what Thomas noticed most was the quiet way she had changed the hearts of the people around her. Even the workers who had once been skeptical now looked at her with respect, sometimes with awe. One morning as Thomas and Noya walked through the pastures, he spoke thoughtfully. "Do you know, Noya, I have lived on this land for years, and I never imagined it could feel like this, alive, hopeful, and strong again. All because of you." Noya smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I only did what I could." The land had life inside it already. It only needed guidance, care, and patience. "You trusted me, Thomas, and that made all the difference." Thomas nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and humility. He realized that trust was the foundation of everything they had achieved. Without it, the ranch might have failed, the animals might have suffered, and the workers might have continued to resist change. Noya had reminded him that courage and wisdom often came from listening, observing, and acting with care. The ranch itself had changed, too. The fences were stronger, the pastures better maintained, and the water supplies carefully managed. The cattle were healthy, the crops had begun to grow again, and even the desert seemed to respond to the careful balance of attention and respect Noya had taught them. Thomas walked among the animals, feeling the strength in their movements and the quiet energy of life returning to the land. But the true transformation was in the people. The ranch hands, once doubtful and hesitant, now worked together with a sense of unity. They followed Noya's guidance, not out of fear or obligation, but out of respect and trust. The teamwork was seamless, and the ranch had become more than a place to work. It had become a community. Thomas realized that he had never experienced this sense of belonging before. For all his years on the ranch, he had been alone, and even the workers had remained distant. Now, with Noya as the guiding heart, the ranch felt alive not just with animals, but with people connected to each other and the land. One day a neighboring rancher came to visit, curious about the stories he had heard of Noya. He had expected conflict, trouble, and tension, but instead, he found a thriving ranch, harmonious workers, and healthy animals. Watching Noya move among the cattle, checking each one carefully, he asked Thomas quietly, "Who is she? How did she manage all this?" Thomas smiled. "She is more than a helper. She is the reason this ranch survived. She brought knowledge, courage, and patience. She helped us all see the land and each other in a new way. I don't know what we would have done without her." The neighboring rancher shook his head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like this," he said. "She's remarkable." Noya, standing nearby, smiled softly at the compliment, but returned to her work, tending to the animals. She did not need praise. Her satisfaction came from seeing the land and the people thriving. Over time, Thomas began to understand the full meaning of her first words, "Let your lineage sprout in me." At the time they had seemed mysterious, almost poetic. But now, he saw that she had indeed carried a lineage, not just of her own heritage, but of knowledge, care, and resilience. She had nurtured the ranch, the animals, and the people around her, allowing life to grow where it had once seemed impossible. One quiet evening, as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Thomas and Noya sat on the porch together. The ranch was calm, the cattle grazing peacefully, and the wind carrying the faint scent of fresh grass. Thomas spoke softly, almost to himself. "Noya, you've changed everything here. Not just the ranch, but me, the workers, even the land itself. I can't thank you enough." Noya looked at him, her expression serene. "You did your part too, Thomas. You trusted me when others doubted."
You let me be part of this place. That made the difference.
"We did this together." Thomas nodded, realizing she was right. The success of the ranch, the survival of the animals, and the unity of the workers had all depended on cooperation, trust, and shared effort. Noya had shown him that true leadership and strength were not about power or control, but about patience, understanding, and the courage to act wisely in the face of adversity. The months turned into years, and the ranch continued to thrive. The cattle grew stronger with each season. The crops flourished, and the land regained its vitality. Noya's guidance had become a permanent part of life on the ranch, and her presence was felt in every fence repaired, every animal cared for, and every worker inspired by her quiet wisdom. Thomas began to see the future in a new way. He realized that the ranch was no longer just a place he owned or worked on. It was a living, breathing community, shaped by the care and dedication of those who lived there. Noya had planted the seeds of knowledge and courage, and now they had grown into something that could last for generations. One spring morning, as Thomas walked through the pastures, he noticed a small herd of calves frolicking in the green grass. They were healthy, strong, and full of life, the result of careful care, trust, and patience. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. The ranch had survived drought, storms, and doubt. It had emerged stronger, and in many ways it had become a better place than he had ever imagined. Noya approached him quietly, her eyes following the calves. "They are strong," she said softly, "and they will grow stronger with time, just as the land and the people will." Thomas nodded, understanding the truth in her words. Life was not easy, and challenges would always come, but with trust, courage, and care, they could overcome anything. Noya had shown him that, and in doing so she had left a lasting mark on the land, the animals, and the people who called the ranch home. The story of Noya and Thomas spread quietly through the nearby settlements. People spoke of the young Apache woman who had arrived at the ranch during the hardest drought in years and had transformed it with her knowledge, courage, and patience. They spoke of the rancher who had trusted her, even when others doubted, and of the lessons learned about resilience, understanding, and unity. But for Thomas and Noya, the greatest reward was not recognition or praise. It was the quiet satisfaction of seeing life flourish where it had once been threatened. It was the peace of knowing that they had faced challenges together and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to each other and the land.
Oh.
One evening, as the stars appeared over the desert and the cool night air replaced the heat of the day, Thomas spoke again, softly and with a smile. "You were right from the start, Noya. Letting your lineage sprout, it changed everything. I understand now. You have brought life in ways I never could have imagined." Noya looked at him, her face calm and serene. "And you have let it grow. That is why we succeeded. Life needs care, patience, and trust. That is what we have given it." Together they stood in silence for a long time, watching the land, the animals, and the stars above. The ranch was no longer a lonely place of struggle. It had become a home, a place of life, hope, and possibility. And in that quiet, shared moment, Thomas knew that Noya had truly sprouted a lineage, not just of survival, but of courage, knowledge, and a future filled with promise. The ranch, the people, And the animals had survived, thrived, and grown because of trust, patience, and care. And in the heart of the desert, a lesson had been learned that would endure far longer than any drought or storm, that life, when nurtured with courage and understanding, could flourish in even the harshest of places.